I'm Greg Guma, and this is the People's Republic. In this very special episode of the People's Republic, Bad Presidents and Doomsday Obsessions. Serious stuff, not a minute to lose. Although, we've seen this movie. Scholars rate presidents based on various categories, things like personal attributes, integrity, intelligence, imagination, a willingness to take risks. Their abilities, like executive competence, leadership, communication skills, and their accomplishments, like party leadership, handling Congress and the economy, the court and the executive appointments, domestic and foreign policy, and the ability to avoid big mistakes. Today, the world is asking, by any of those measures, is Donald Trump the worst president ever? Despite what we're seeing, it's still too early to tell. After all, it's a stiff competition. James Buchanan is often considered the very worst, mainly for his inept leadership during the lead-up to the Civil War. Another obvious choice is Warren Harding, who played poker in the 1920s while his friends plundered the Treasury. He died in office. Also high on most lists are Richard Nixon and Herbert Hoover. One basically for being a political thug, the other for presiding over the start of the Great Depression. But let's not forget William Henry Harrison, who only lasted a month in office, or the series of presidential embarrassments elected before the Civil War. John Tyler, a stalwart defender of slavery in the 1840s. Millard Fillmore, who backed the Compromise of 1850 that delayed Southern secession by allowing slavery to spread. Franklin Pierce, who added more slave states in the 1850s. James Buchanan, who refused to challenge slavery spread or the block of states that became the Confederacy. And Andrew Johnson, who barely survived impeachment after opposing Reconstruction, including the 14th Amendment. Does Trump realize he may ultimately be judged as worse than any of them? Aside from that, does he even know that he's playing the arch-villain in our national story? Like, say, Gene Hackman in The Quick and the Dead, absolute ruler of a place brought low, with the population forced to watch public spectacles, kind of like a terminal survivor or killer apprentice. Actually, Trump is a bit like Gene Hackman playing another villain, President Alan Richmond, in the film Absolute Power. Much as we imagine Trump, in the opening moments of that film, he sexually assaults a rich friend's wife, but his victim fights back, only to be shot down by the Secret Service. Fortunately, Clint Eastwood is hiding behind a one-way mirror after robbing the place, and that's too bad for Hackman. In the end, he's stabbed to death in the Oval Office by the husband he betrayed. I guess that's absolute justice, if only. Most of us would prefer a president more like Harrison Ford, who played one named James Marshall and personally retook command of his plane in midair in Air Force One. But we've also certainly seen and imagined bad presidents before, on the big screen and the small. Like Martin Sheen, long before playing the liberal icon Josiah Bartlett in The West Wing, he was a president who almost blows up the planet in The Prophecy. That time we were saved by a psychic, Christopher Walken. Unlikely. Before Kevin Spacey was exposed for his serial sexual excess, he played the memorable Frank Underwood, a truly bad president, too close to real life for comfort. And then there's Jack Nicholson, who was ridiculously funny and bad, as James Dale in Mars Attacks. Both died in office. Real billionaire Mark Cuban also briefly played a president, Marcus Robbins, one who is very handy with hand grenades and a shotgun when he is called to protect the White House in Sharknado 3. That's probably as close as Mark Cuban will get to the office. And, of course, we have Cliff Robertson as the Trumpian Jack Cahill in Escape from L.A. Classic villain. If you don't recall, President Cahill exiled everyone who didn't embrace his hyper-conservative worldview. He literally sent them all to Los Angeles, which has become a walled-off island after a huge earthquake. Pretty realistic so far. But in the end, a one-eyed hero named Snake Plissken presses a button, and that ends all technological activity on the planet. Then Snake lights a banned cigarette and he says, "Welcome to the human race." Dark. Very dark.
Ladies and gentlemen, following on the news given in our bulletin a moment ago, the Government Meteorological Bureau has requested the large observatories of the country to keep an astronomical watch on any further disturbances occurring on the planet Mars. Due to the unusual nature of this occurrence, we have arranged an interview with the noted astronomer, Professor Pearson, who will give us his views on this event. In a few moments, we will take you to the Princeton Observatory at Princeton, New Jersey. We return you until then to the music of Raymond Raquello and his orchestra. We are ready now to take you to the Princeton Observatory at Princeton, where Carl Phillips, our commentator, will interview Professor Richard Pearson, famous astronomer. We take you now to Princeton, New Jersey.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Carl Phillips speaking to you from the observatory.
On Halloween Eve in 1938, terror swept the nation. People thought the world was coming to an end. Some tried flight or suicide. Others just cringed in their homes as aliens attacked New Jersey, then New York, and the world. But it was just a radio performance, albeit one that tapped a deep national well of pre-war anxiety, produced for radio by Orson Welles in his Mercury Theater. You just heard a bit of it. Times have changed so radically since then that in the face of real disasters like the 3 Mile Island partial meltdown in 1979, the explosion and fire at Chernobyl in 1986, the 2011 earthquake and tsunami sparked disaster in Japan, or the election of Donald Trump, many people are deceptively calm. Are we really so confident about our ability to cope and recover, or have we given in to an overarching pessimism about the future of the planet and the fate of humanity? According to a survey by the Encyclopedia Britannica in 1980, nearly half of all U.S. junior high school students believed that World War III would begin by the year 2000. If you consider subsequent events, the youth of that day, now in their 40s and 50s, were only off by a little. Many people believe the environment is critically damaged. Yet, this sounds almost cautious when compared to the looming calamity projected through our films and books and news media. There have been many such predictions for a long time, but in the last few decades, they have proliferated almost as rapidly as nuclear weapons during a Cold War. Some scenarios dramatize a Big Bang theory, global devastation caused by some extinction-level event. Fortunately, a few others do chart a slightly more hopeful future, one in which humanity either smartens up in time to save itself or manages to survive. Rather than a desire to be scared out of our wits, the attraction to such stories and predictions may reflect a widespread interest in confronting the likely future. The mass media may, in fact, be producing training guides for the coming dark age. But let's check back in with Orson Welles and his radio invasion.
Chief of Astronomical Division, unquote. Professor Pearson, could this occurrence possibly have something to do with the disturbances observed on the planet Mars?
Hardly, Mr. Phillips. This is probably a meteorite of unusual size, and its arrival at this particular time is merely a coincidence. However, we shall conduct the search as soon as daylight permits.
Thank you, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 10 minutes, we've been speaking to you from the observatory at Princeton, bringing you a special interview with Professor Pearson, noted astronomer. This is Carl Phillips speaking. We are returning you now to our New York studio.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is the latest bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. Toronto, Canada. Professor Morse of Macmillan University reports observing a total of 3 explosions on the planet Mars between the hours of 7:45 p.m. and 9:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This confirms earlier reports received from American observatories. Now, nearer home, comes a special bulletin from Trenton, New Jersey. It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton. The flash in the sky was visible within a radius of several hundred miles, and the noise of the impact was heard as far north as Elizabeth. We have dispatched a special mobile unit to the scene, and we'll have our commentator, Carl Phillips, give you a word picture of the scene as soon as he can reach there from Princeton. In the meantime, we take you to the Hotel Martinet in Brooklyn, where Bobby Millett and his orchestra are offering a program of dance music. We take you now to Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Carl Phillips again, out at the Wilmot Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Professor Pearson and myself made the 11 miles from Princeton in 10 minutes.
Well, this sounds serious, but we'll have to come back to Grover's Mill. As you know, sometimes humanity or California is saved in the nick of time by individual sacrifice, exceptional luck, or collective action. Sometimes, as in the classics On the Beach, Dr. Strangelove, or The Omega Man, we're basically toast, wiped out. Occasionally, there are decent long-term possibilities for survival, but technology usually breaks down and the environment takes strange revenge. In some cases, the future is so dismal that it's hardly worth going on, like in Cormac McCarthy's The Road. And, in a few cases, the end of humanity is just a piece of cosmic black humor. All these are speculative visions, many adapted from ideas originally developed in pulp science fiction or from the prophetic statements of figures like Edgar Cayce. The films usually offer a way out. Audiences generally favor hopeful endings, while deep doom and gloom tends to gain more traction in print. But both scenarios share the assumption that the track we're on leads to a dangerous dead end. We seem to keep asking the same basic questions. How do we get to the apocalypse, and what happens after that? One obvious way is to get pretty close to misusing technology, especially when the mistakes are made as a result of greed or power or the desire for knowledge or just cold cash. But sometimes prophecies go mainstream. You know, there are simply too many novels about the end of the current civilization, too many to list, and perhaps too many for our psychological health, too. It could be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Only a few decades ago, people who accepted the prophecies of Nostradamus or Edgar Cayce were mocked by the mainstream society, and even by some of their close friends. Cayce, by the way, predicted that the western part of the U.S. would be broken up, that most of Japan would be covered by water, and that New York would be destroyed by 1998. Maybe he meant Mayor Giuliani's remake of Times Square. Nearly 400 years earlier, however, Nostradamus, whose benefactor was Henry II of France, said that Western civilization would be under heavy attack from the East in 1999, with possible cataclysmic repercussions.